The conference room fell silent when Richard Hartley said those two words. "You're fired." His smirk was the same one he'd worn for 3 years, the one that said I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a charity case he'd been forced to tolerate. The other executives around the polished mahogany table shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes while others watched with barely concealed satisfaction. They all knew what was coming. They'd seen this performance before. I stood there in my second-hand blazer, the one with the slightly frayed sleeve I always tried to hide, feeling 20 pairs of eyes boring into me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the room. My hands weren't shaking, not anymore. That surprised me. After everything that had happened in the last 72 hours, after the discovery that changed everything, my hands were perfectly still. "That's a shame," I heard myself say, my voice carrying a calmness that seemed to startle even me. I reached into my worn leather bag, the one Richard had once called unprofessional, in front of the entire marketing department, and pulled out a single document. Because I just bought the company. The smirk froze on his face, like a mask that had suddenly cracked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how a 23-year-old nobody from the wrong side of Chicago ended up owning one of the city's most prestigious marketing firms, you need to know how it all started. You need to know about the music box, about my grandmother's secret, and about the 3 years of humiliation that nearly broke me before I discovered who I really was. If you've ever been told you're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, this story is for you. Because sometimes the very people who try to destroy you end up handing you the keys to your own kingdom. They just don't know it yet. Stay with me, and I'll tell you exactly how the office charity case became the owner of a $30 million company. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Emma Chen, though for most of my life, that name meant nothing to anyone. I was the girl who wore the same 3 outfits on rotation, who brought lunch in recycled takeout containers, who took the bus while my coworkers complained about parking their BMWs. At Hartley & Associates, I wasn't Emma. I was the diversity hire, the scholarship girl, Richard's little project. These weren't names they called me to my face, of course. They whispered them in the break room, muttered them by the water cooler, typed them in group chats I was deliberately excluded from. Richard Hartley had hired me straight out of community college, not the prestigious university his other employees boasted about on their LinkedIn profiles. He never let me forget it was a favor, a generous gesture to give back to the community, as he'd announced during my first day. The announcement had been made in front of the entire office, with me standing there like a zoo animal on display while he talked about providing opportunities to the less fortunate. The memory still makes my skin crawl. "Emma here," he'd said, his hand heavy on my shoulder, "represents our commitment to diversity and inclusion. She may not have the traditional background we usually look for, but everyone deserves a chance, don't they?" The pause before traditional had been deliberate, loaded with meaning everyone understood. Not our kind, not good enough. Lucky to be here. The job itself was supposed to be in marketing assistance, but I quickly learned that meant being everyone's personal assistant. I fetched coffee for executives who earned more in a month than my mother made in a year. I organized files for account managers who couldn't be bothered to learn my name, calling me "Hey, you," or simply snapping their fingers when they needed something. I stayed late doing work that others took credit for, arrived early to prepare presentations I'd never be allowed to deliver. The worst part wasn't even the menial tasks. It was the constant reminders of my place in their hierarchy, like when Jessica Winters, the senior account executive with the perfect blonde highlights and the Hermes bags, would accidentally schedule important client meetings during my lunch break, knowing I couldn't afford to buy food if I missed my brought-from-home meal. Or when David Park, the creative director who drove a different luxury car each month, would loudly discuss expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs, then turn to me with fake concern. "Oh, Emma, you probably don't know these places. They're a bit upscale." But the true master of casual cruelty was Richard himself. He had a gift for humiliation disguised as mentorship. "Emma," he'd say in meetings, "why don't you tell us what you think? It's always refreshing to hear the perspective from someone with your background." The way he said background made it sound like a disease. When I'd offer an idea, usually one I'd spent hours researching and perfecting, he'd nod with that patronizing smile and say, "That's interesting, very creative. Of course, our clients expect a certain level of sophistication, but it's good that you're trying." 3 years. 3 years of this slow, deliberate erosion of my self-worth. 3 years of being told in 1,000 small ways that I didn't belong, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. 3 years of watching less qualified people get promoted over me because they had the right last names, the right schools, the right connections. My apartment, if you could call a studio with a leaking ceiling and a radiator that only worked half the time an apartment, was my only refuge. Every night, I'd come home to those 4 walls and try to wash off the day's humiliations in a shower that ran out of hot water after 5 minutes. I'd eat my dinner of rice and whatever vegetables were on sale that week, and I'd tell myself the same lie I'd been telling myself since day one. It will get better. Work harder. Prove yourself. Eventually, they'll see your worth. My mother, when she was still alive, used to say I was too proud for my own good. "Emma," she'd tell me in Mandarin, the only language we spoke at home, "pride is a luxury we can't afford. Keep your head down. Be grateful for what you have." She'd worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my father left, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves in the early morning, taking care of other people's children during the day. She died 2 years into my job at Hartley & Associates, still believing her daughter had made it in corporate America. I never had the heart to tell her the truth. The only family I had left was my grandmother, my Nai, who lived in a nursing home in Chinatown. Visiting her was the highlight of my week, even though dementia had stolen most of her memories. Sometimes she'd look at me with recognition, calling me by my mother's name. Other times, she'd stare right through me, lost in a past I could never reach. But even in her confusion, she'd sometimes say things that felt prophetic. "The Chen family," she'd mutter in Mandarin, her clouded eyes suddenly sharp. "We were not always poor. We were not always nobody. There are secrets, Xiao Bao," her pet name for me. Secrets hidden in plain sight. The music box knows. The music box remembers. I'd assumed it was the dementia talking. She'd mentioned this music box dozens of times, but when I'd asked the nursing home staff, they said she'd arrived with only a small suitcase of clothes and old photographs. No music box, no secrets, just the ramblings of an old woman whose mind was slowly unwinding. That was my life. Days filled with professional humiliation, evenings in a cramped apartment, weekends with a grandmother who spoke in riddles. I had resigned myself to this existence, convinced that this was simply my lot in life. Some people were born to shine. Others were born to serve those who did. I had accepted my role in this cruel arithmetic of worth. Everything changed on a Thursday that started like any other. I'd arrived at the office at 7 a.m., an hour before most employees, to prepare for the quarterly board meeting. Richard had tasked me with creating all the presentation materials, compiling the financial reports, and setting up the conference room, work that should have been distributed among a team but had somehow all landed on my desk. I'd worked until midnight the night before, survived on 4 hours of sleep, and skipped breakfast to make sure everything was perfect. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:45, Richard called me into his office. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, the one he'd had imported from Italy, cleaning his glasses with deliberate slowness. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Chicago skyline that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. "Emma," he said without looking up, "there's been a change of plans." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. "The board members are particular about their meetings," he continued, finally meeting my eyes. "They prefer a certain caliber of professional presence. You understand?" "I don't understand," I said, though I did. Of course I did. He sighed as if I was being deliberately obtuse. "You won't be needed in the meeting. Jessica will present the materials you've prepared. We need someone who can speak the board's language. Someone with more polish." Polish. Another code word for not you. "I created those presentations," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know every detail, every metric." "And you did adequate work," he interrupted, the word adequate sharp as a blade. "But Emma, you have to understand your limitations. The board consists of very important people. They expect a certain standard. Your role here is to support, not to shine. I thought you understood that by now." 3 years of swallowed pride, 3 years of biting my tongue, 3 years of keeping my head down as my mother had advised. It all crystallized in that moment. But I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and left his office, my face a mask of professional composure, while inside, something fundamental had finally broken. Or maybe, looking back, it had finally been set free. I went back to my desk, the smallest one in the office, crammed in a corner by the supply closet, and mechanically continued working. I could hear the board members arriving, their confident voices carrying across the office. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched Jessica present my work, watched her receive nods of approval and congratulations for insights I had uncovered, strategies I had developed. During the lunch break, while everyone was schmoozing with the board members at the catered meal I wasn't invited to, I did something I'd never done before. I left the office in the middle of the day, not to run an errand for someone else, not to pick up dry cleaning or coffee or whatever demeaning task had been assigned. I left for myself. I found myself in Chinatown, standing outside my grandmother's nursing home. I hadn't planned to go there. My feet had simply carried me to the one place where I still felt like a person rather than a prop in someone else's success story. Nai was having one of her clear days. She recognized me immediately, reaching out with her paper-thin hands to touch my face. "Xiao Bao," she said, "you look tired. You look defeated." "I'm fine, Nai," I lied. She studied me with those ancient eyes that seemed to see through everything. "No," she said firmly, "you are not fine. You are disappearing. Every time you visit, there is less of you. They are erasing you, whoever they are." The accuracy of her observation broke through my composure. Tears I'd been holding back for 3 years suddenly spilled over. "I don't know how much more I can take," I admitted. "They treat me like I'm nothing, like I'm less than nothing, and maybe they're right. Maybe I am nothing." My grandmother's hand tightened on mine with surprising strength. "You are Chen Mei Ling's daughter," she said, using my mother's Chinese name. "You are Chen Wei Long's granddaughter. You are not nothing. You have forgotten who you are, but the truth remains." "What truth?" I asked, frustrated. "We're nobody, Nai. We've always been nobody." She was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a voice so clear it startled me. "The music box," she said, "in my room, behind the portrait of your grandfather. I hid it there when I came to this place. They never knew. The nurses, they never knew to look." "Nai, there is no music box." "Behind the portrait," she insisted, with such force that a nurse poked her head in to check on us. "Promise me you'll look. Promise me." To calm her, I promised. She relaxed then, sinking back into her chair, and within minutes had drifted off to sleep. I kissed her forehead and prepared to leave, but something made me walk to her room instead of the exit. Her room was small and sparse, a single bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. On the wall hung a faded portrait of my grandfather, a man I'd never met who had died before I was born. The portrait was the only decoration in the room, a black and white photograph in a simple wooden frame showing a serious-looking man in a Western suit. I don't know what made me reach for it. Maybe it was the desperation of the day, the need to believe in something, anything that might change my circumstances. The frame was dusty, clearly hadn't been moved in years. I lifted it carefully off its hook. There, in a hollow carved into the wall behind the frame, was a small wooden music box. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. It was beautiful despite its age, mahogany wood with mother-of-pearl inlay depicting a phoenix rising from flames. It was locked with no visible key, but when I pressed the small phoenix design on the front, I heard a soft click. Inside, instead of the musical mechanism I expected, was a collection of documents. Old documents, yellowed with age, some in Chinese, others in English. As I began to read them, the room seemed to spin around me. Stock certificates, dozens of them, all in my grandfather's name, Chen Weilong. But not just any stocks. These were original shares in what was then a small Chicago investment firm called Hartley Investments, dated 1952. According to the documents, my grandfather had been one of the original investors when Richard Hartley's grandfather, William Hartley, had started the company. But there was more. Letters between my grandfather and William Hartley discussing partnership terms. A contract that had never been executed, promising my grandfather 25% of the company in exchange for his initial investment and connections in the Asian markets. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a letter dated 1953 from William Hartley that made my blood run cold. Mr. Chen, I regret to inform you that due to recent regulations regarding foreign nationals and business ownership, we cannot proceed with our original agreement. Your investment will be returned to you with interest. I trust you understand this is for the best. Some partnerships are simply not meant to be. The regulations were never specified. The investment, according to a handwritten note in my grandfather's script, was never returned. He had been cheated, erased from the company's history, his contribution stolen. But William Hartley had made one crucial mistake. He had never formally dissolved my grandfather's shares. Perhaps he'd assumed a Chinese immigrant would never understand American corporate law well enough to matter. Perhaps he'd simply forgotten about them, confident in his theft. Those shares, according to the documents in my shaking hands, had been passed down to my grandmother upon my grandfather's death, then to my mother, and now they belonged to me. I sat on my grandmother's narrow bed, surrounded by papers that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in the world, about the company where I'd been treated like dirt for 3 years. The original investment of $5,000, a fortune for a Chinese immigrant in 1952, would be worth, I couldn't even calculate it. With 70 years of compound growth, stock splits, and the fact that Hartley & Associates was now a $30 million company, I was not the charity case. I was not the diversity hire. I was a major shareholder. The next 3 days were a blur of lawyers, authentication processes, and discoveries that left me reeling. The attorney I hired, paid for with my last credit card, maxed out on hope, was a small firm that specialized in historical corporate law. When Leonard Zhao, the senior partner, and coincidentally another Chinese American who understood exactly what had likely happened to my grandfather, saw the documents, his eyes lit up like he'd found the Holy Grail. "These are legitimate," he said after hours of verification. "More than legitimate. They're a smoking gun. Your grandfather's shares were never dissolved, never bought back. They've been sitting dormant for 70 years, accumulating value. According to corporate law, you don't just own shares, Miss Chen. Due to various splits and the way the company structured its growth, you own approximately 18% of Hartley & Associates." 18%? I repeated, stunned. "That's not the best part," Leonard said, a smile playing at his lips. "Richard Hartley owns 22%. His family sold off portions over the years to fund expansions. The board members and other investors own the rest, but they're fragmented. No one else owns more than 5% individually." "So Richard still has control," I said, deflated. "Not necessarily." Leonard pulled out his laptop. "I've been doing some research. 3 of the board members have been looking to sell their shares. They're older, want to cash out. Together they own 12%. If you could acquire those shares—" "I don't have that kind of money," I said immediately. "I can barely afford rent." "No," Leonard agreed, "but you have something else. You have proof that the company was built on fraud, that the Hartley family stole from your grandfather. That's a lawsuit worth millions in damages. But more importantly, it's a scandal that would destroy Richard Hartley's reputation and tank the company's value. The board members won't want that. They'll want to settle quietly." "Settle how?" Leonard's smile widened. "By selling you their shares at a very reasonable price to make this all go away. With 18% plus 12%, you'd have 30%. You'd be the majority shareholder. You could take control of the entire company." The room spun. That's insane." "No," Leonard corrected. "That's justice. 70 years late, but justice nonetheless." The next part required courage I didn't know I possessed. Leonard and I approached the 3 board members privately, presenting our case. The evidence was undeniable, the threat to their investments clear. They were businessmen before anything else. They understood the mathematics of scandal versus profit. "Sell to me at market value," I proposed through Leonard, "and this stays quiet. The company continues to thrive. Your remaining investments are protected. Fight me, and I go public with everything. The company's reputation crumbles, your shares become worthless, and you spend years in legal battles." It took exactly 1 day for them to agree. The financing was arranged through a loan against my inherited shares. Leonard knew investors who understood the value of what I was acquiring. Within 72 hours of finding that music box, I had signed papers that would make me the majority owner of Hartley and Associates. Richard didn't know. No one at the company knew. The transfers wouldn't be official until Monday morning, and I had insisted on absolute secrecy until then. I wanted to give Richard one more chance to show his true colors, to cement why what I was about to do was not revenge, but justice. Which brings us back to that conference room, to Richard's smirk, to the moment he fired me. It was Friday afternoon, the end of the worst and best week of my life. Richard had called an all-hands meeting, something he rarely did. The entire staff was gathered in the main conference room, 43 people who had made my life miserable in ways both large and small. "I wanted everyone to be here for this," Richard began, standing at the head of the table like a king addressing his court. "As you know, we've been evaluating our staffing needs, looking at performance metrics and cultural fit." Cultural fit. There it was again. "It's come to my attention that not everyone here is meeting our standards," he continued, his eyes finding me in the crowd. "Excellence isn't just about doing the work. It's about embodying the values and image of Hartley and Associates. It's about representing us properly to our clients and partners." Jessica smirked. David typed something on his phone, probably already sharing the gossip. Others shifted uncomfortably, knowing what was coming, but unwilling to intervene. "Emma," Richard said, his voice carrying that false regret he'd perfected over the years. "Could you come up here, please?" I stood, my second-hand blazer suddenly feeling like armor. I walked to the front of the room, every eye following me, most filled with pity, some with satisfaction. "Emma has been with us for 3 years, Richard announced, "and while we appreciate her efforts, it's become clear that she's reached the limit of what she can contribute here. Sometimes, despite our best intentions to be inclusive, we have to acknowledge when someone simply doesn't have what it takes to grow with the company." He turned to me, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. "You're fired, Emma. Please clean out your desk. Security will escort you." "That's a shame," I interrupted, my voice carrying across the room with a clarity that surprised everyone, including me. I reached into my bag, that same worn leather bag he'd mocked, and pulled out the folder Leonard had prepared. "Because I just bought the company." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in Beijing. Richard's smirk froze, twisted into something between confusion and amusement. "I'm sorry, what? Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke. I said, pulling out the legal documents. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I officially own 30% of Hartley & Associates, making me the majority shareholder, which means technically you just tried to fire your boss. That's impossible, Richard sputtered. You can barely afford lunch. You're right, I agreed. I couldn't afford lunch most days because I was sending every spare penny to my grandmother's nursing home, the grandmother whose husband, my grandfather, was one of the original investors in this company, the grandfather your grandfather cheated and erased from history. I laid the original documents on the table, the contracts, the letters, the evidence of 70 years of theft. My grandfather's shares were never dissolved, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. They've been sitting dormant, accumulating value, waiting, and now they're mine, along with the 12% I purchased from board members who preferred a quiet transfer to a public scandal. Richard's face had gone from red to white to an interesting shade of purple. This is fraud. This is justice, I corrected. Your family built this company on the foundation of my grandfather's money and connections, then discarded him because he was Chinese. You thought we were nobody, that we would always be nobody. You were wrong. Jessica stood up, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the table. This is ridiculous. She can't just... Actually, I can, I said, turning to face her. And my first act as majority shareholder is to announce some changes. Jessica, you're fired. Clear out your desk. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. David, I continued, turning to the creative director who'd tormented me with his casual wealth. You're also fired. Security will escort you both out. You can't do this, David shouted. I can and I am. Anyone who participated in the systematic harassment and humiliation of employees will be under review. I have 3 years of documented incidents, emails, and recordings. Yes, recordings. Legal in Illinois as long as one party consents, and I always consented to recording my own conversations. The room erupted in chaos. Some people were frantically checking their phones, probably trying to remember every interaction they'd had with me. Others sat frozen in shock. A few, the ones who had always been professionally courteous, who had never participated in the cruelty, looked almost relieved. Richard tried one last desperate move. The board won't stand for this. The board, I said calmly, has already approved the transition. They're business people, Richard. They care about profit, not your pride. And they know I have enough evidence of corporate misconduct under your leadership to bury this company in lawsuits. They'd rather have me as a leader than you as a liability. Leonard Zhao entered the room then, right on cue, followed by 3 security guards and a representative from the board. Mr. Hartley, the board representative said, we need you to come with us. There are papers to sign, transitions to arrange. This is my company, Richard screamed, all pretense of composure gone. My family's company. No, I said quietly. It was built with my family's money. You just borrowed it for 70 years. Now I'm collecting what's mine with interest. As security escorted Richard, Jessica, and David out, their shock and humiliation palpable, I turned to address the remaining employees. Many looked terrified, probably wondering if they were next. I want to be clear, I began. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for reform. This company has operated on principles of exclusion, prejudice, and cruelty, disguised as excellence. That ends today. I walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline that Richard had lorded over, then turned back to face them. Those of you who have treated every colleague with respect, regardless of their background or position, have nothing to fear. In fact, you have everything to gain. Promotions will now be based on merit, not connections. Ideas will be judged on their value, not on who presents them. And everyone will be paid fairly for their contributions. A young intern in the back, someone I'd seen Richard humiliate just last week, raised her hand tentatively. What about those of us who stood by and did nothing when we saw others being mistreated? It was a brave question. I respected her for asking it. "We all make choices," I said. "Sometimes we stay silent out of fear, out of self-preservation. I understand that. But moving forward, silence in the face of injustice won't be acceptable. We're going to build a culture where speaking up is rewarded, not punished." The room was processing this shift in their reality. I could see it in their faces, some calculating their chances, others genuinely relieved, a few clearly planning their resignations. "For those wondering if I'm qualified to run this company," I continued, "you're right to wonder. I've spent 3 years at the bottom of this hierarchy, doing work that was never acknowledged, creating strategies that were credited to others. But that also means I know this company inside and out. I know its weaknesses, its strengths, and most importantly, I know how to fix what's broken." An older accountant, Margaret, who had always been kind to me in small ways, leaving cookies on my desk, warning me when Richard was in a particularly foul mood, spoke up. "What's your vision for the company?" "Growth through genuine diversity," I said. "Not the fake kind where you hire one person from a marginalized background and parade them around. Real diversity of thought, experience, and perspective. Studies show diverse companies outperform homogeneous ones by 35%. We're going to prove those studies right." I pulled up a presentation on the screen, one I'd created during my 3 sleepless nights of planning. "We're going to expand into markets that Richard ignored because he didn't understand them. We're going to partner with businesses he dismissed because they weren't run by people who looked like him. We're going to take everything that made me unsuitable in his eyes and turn it into our competitive advantage." The presentation showed projected growth, new market opportunities, partnership possibilities I'd researched during my years of being ignored in meetings. The room began to buzz with genuine interest. "And," I added, "we're going to start by promoting internally. Margaret, you've been assistant head of accounting for 15 years. You should have been CFO a decade ago. Congratulations on your promotion." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Thomas," I continued, addressing a brilliant strategist who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times because he was too quiet for leadership, "you're our new head of strategic planning." One by one, I named the people who had shown talent but been held back, who had demonstrated kindness in a cruel environment, who had potential that had been deliberately overlooked. "This isn't charity," I emphasized. "This is recognizing value that was always there. Richard's biggest weakness wasn't his cruelty. It was his inability to see talent that didn't mirror his own image." Someone asked about Richard's clients, the ones loyal to him personally. "Some will leave," I acknowledged. "Let them. We'll replace them with clients who value innovation over tradition, results over relationships, and for those worried about stability, I've already secured 3 major contracts that Richard turned down because the companies were too ethnic for his taste. Those contracts alone will offset any losses from his departures." The meeting continued for 2 hours. By the end, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Fear had given way to cautious optimism, shock to possibility. When I finally dismissed everyone, asking them to take the weekend to decide if they wanted to be part of this new chapter, the response was immediate. They applauded. Not the polite, obligatory applause of corporate meetings. Real, genuine, some with tears in their eyes, applause. The intern who'd asked about staying silent was crying openly. Margaret hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. As the room emptied, I stood alone in the space where I'd been humiliated so many times. The same conference room where Richard had told me I'd never be more than what I was. The same view he'd used to remind me of my place below him. Now it was mine. But the story doesn't end there. The real work was just beginning. The next Monday, when the news became public, the business world exploded. "Diversity hire becomes majority owner," read one headline. "The 70-year revenge, how one woman reclaimed her family's legacy," read another. My phone rang nonstop with interview requests, partnership proposals, and yes, threats from Richard's lawyers. Richard himself tried everything. He challenged the authenticity of the documents. They were verified by 3 independent experts. He claimed elder abuse regarding the board members who sold to me. They testified that they made clear-headed business decisions. He even tried to argue that the original shares had expired. Corporate law said otherwise. Each attack only made the story bigger, made the David versus Goliath narrative more compelling. Social media exploded with support. Justice for Emma trended for a week. Other employees from other companies started sharing their own stories of discrimination and humiliation. But I wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. I had a company to run. The first 100 days were brutal. Half of Richard's senior management team quit, taking their clients with them. Stock prices initially dropped 20%. Every decision I made was scrutinized, every mistake magnified. The business press was waiting for me to fail, to prove that I was indeed the unqualified diversity hire Richard had always claimed. But something remarkable happened. The employees who stayed, and most did stay, worked harder than they ever had under Richard. Not out of fear, but out of genuine investment in what we were building. The new hires I brought in, brilliant people from backgrounds Richard would have dismissed, brought fresh perspectives that revolutionized our strategies. Margaret, in her new role as CFO, discovered millions in inefficiencies that Richard's ego had refused to acknowledge. Thomas's strategic planning opened up 3 new revenue streams in the first quarter alone. The intern who'd asked about silence, her name was Amy, became my executive assistant and eventually, with proper training and opportunity, one of our best project managers. 6 months after I took control, we landed the Zhao Industries account, a $50 million contract that Richard had been chasing for 5 years. Mr. Zhao, the CEO, told me personally, "I never trusted Richard. Something about him felt false. But you? You understand what it means to build something from nothing, to prove yourself against odds. That's the kind of partner I want." A year in, our revenue had increased by 40%. We were featured in Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and yes, even that same business magazine that had once done a puff piece on Richard's leadership style. But the moment that meant the most to me came on a quiet Thursday afternoon, almost exactly a year after I'd found the music box. I was visiting my grandmother. Her dementia had progressed, and she rarely recognized me anymore. But that day, as I sat holding her hand, telling her about the company, about reclaiming our family's legacy, her eyes suddenly cleared. "Xiao Bao," she said, clear as day. "Your grandfather. He would be so proud. We were never nothing. You remembered." "I remembered, Nai," I said through tears. "The phoenix," she said, touching my face with her trembling hand, "rising from the ashes. That's what the music box showed. That's what you are." She passed away 2 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, hundreds of people came, employees whose lives had been changed by the new opportunities at the company, business partners who respected what we'd built, community members who'd heard our story. Even Leonard Zhao came, bowing deeply at her casket. "She raised a warrior," he said simply. Richard, I heard, tried to start his own consulting firm. It failed within 6 months. Jessica moved to New York, where she discovered that her reputation preceded her. David ended up working for a small firm in the suburbs, a far cry from his luxury car collection days. I took no pleasure in their downfalls. They were simply experiencing what it felt like to be judged solely on their merits, without the protection of privilege and connections. As for me, I moved out of that terrible apartment into a modest house. Nothing extravagant, but with reliable heating and a shower that never ran out of hot water. I started a scholarship fund in my mother and grandmother's names for first-generation college students. I implemented a mentorship program at the company pairing senior staff with junior employees from underrepresented backgrounds. But perhaps the most important change was in how I saw myself. For 3 years, I had internalized their vision of me, the charity case, the diversity hire, the one who didn't belong. I had begun to believe that maybe they were right, that maybe I was nothing. The music box didn't just contain stocks and documents. It contained the truth that my grandmother had tried to tell me all along. We were never nothing. We had been erased, overlooked, underestimated, but we were never nothing. Every morning now when I walk into the office, my office, in the building my grandfather helped fund, I see young employees who remind me of myself 3 years ago. Hungry, talented, but uncertain of their place in a world that seems designed to exclude them. I make sure they know from day one that they belong, that their perspectives are valued, that their backgrounds are strengths, not weaknesses. The company is now worth $50 million. We're expanding internationally, particularly into Asian markets that Richard never understood or valued. We've won awards for workplace diversity, for innovation, for corporate ethics. But those aren't the victories that matter most to me. What matters is the email I received last week from Amy, the former intern, now a project manager. She had just closed her first major deal, bringing in a client that competitors had been courting for months. "I did it," she wrote. "For the first time in my professional life, I felt like I truly belonged in that room. Thank you for showing me that was possible." What matters is the letter from a young Chinese-American woman who read about our story and decided not to give up on her own dreams, despite facing discrimination at her workplace. "You showed me that the people who try to diminish us only reveal their own limitations," she wrote. "What matters is the framed photo on my desk, not of corporate achievements or business awards, but of my grandmother, my mother, and me." 3 generations of Chen women who were told they were nothing and proved the world wrong in their own ways. Sometimes Richard's former clients ask me if I feel vindicated, if I enjoy having turned the tables so dramatically. They expect me to gloat, to revel in his downfall. But that's not what this was about. It was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking back what was stolen. Not just the money or the shares, but the dignity, the recognition, the right to exist in spaces that were built with our contributions, but denied to us. It was about proving that excellence comes in many forms, speaks in many accents, and arrives from many backgrounds. The music box sits in my office now, displayed in a glass case. Employees often ask about it, and I tell them the story, all of it. The theft, the erasure, the discovery, the reclamation. I tell them about my grandfather's faith in American opportunity, even when America didn't have faith in him. I tell them about my grandmother's persistence in hiding the truth, protecting it for the right moment. I tell them about my mother's sacrifices, working 3 jobs so her daughter could have a chance at something better. But mostly, I tell them about the 3 years I spent believing I was nothing, and how dangerous it is to let others define your worth. I tell them about Jessica's smirks, and David's casual cruelty, and Richard's systematic humiliation, not to demonize them, but to illustrate how prejudice disguises itself as professionalism, how discrimination masquerades as cultural fit. Last month, I was invited to speak at my old community college, the one Richard had mocked so thoroughly. The auditorium was packed with students who looked like me from 3 years ago, hungry, talented, but unsure if there was a place for them in corporate America. "They will tell you that you don't belong," I said to those eager faces. "They will use words like polish and fit and traditional to make you feel less than. They will take credit for your work and blame you for their failures. They will try to convince you that you should be grateful for whatever crumbs they offer." The room was silent, everyone leaning forward. But here's what they don't want you to know. Their power depends on your belief in your own powerlessness. The moment you stop believing their version of your worth, the moment you recognize your own value, their whole system starts to crumble. I told them about the music box, about the 70-year-old secret that changed everything. But I also told them that not everyone has a hidden inheritance, a dramatic reversal of fortune. Most people have to build their vindication slowly, methodically, through excellence they can't ignore and persistence they can't break. Document everything, I advised. Build your networks, support each other, and never ever let them convince you that you're nothing. Because the people who work hardest to make you feel small are the ones who fear what you'll become when you realize how big you truly are. After the talk, a young woman approached me. Korean American, first-generation college student, working 2 jobs to pay for school. She reminded me so much of myself, it was almost painful. "How did you survive it?" she asked. "Those 3 years when they treated you like nothing? How did you not give up?" I thought about lying, about giving her some inspirational quote about inner strength or perseverance. But she deserved the truth. "I almost did give up," I admitted. "Every single day I wanted to quit. Some nights I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't be what they wanted. I started to believe their version of me." Her eyes filled with tears of recognition. "But," I continued, "there was always this small voice, maybe it was my mother's, maybe my grandmother's, maybe my own, that whispered, 'Not yet, not yet. Wait, endure. Your moment will come.' And when it did come, I was ready. Not because I was special or exceptional, but because those 3 years of humiliation had taught me everything about the company, about the industry, about the people I was dealing with. They thought they were breaking me down. They were actually building me up." She nodded, understanding. "Your moment will come too," I told her. "Maybe not as dramatically as mine. Maybe it will be quieter, subtler. But it will come, and when it does, you'll be ready. Because every slight, every dismissal, every moment they make you feel like nothing, you're learning, you're growing stronger, you're preparing." I gave her my card, told her to call me when she graduated. She's starting at our company next month as a junior analyst, with a fair salary, clear advancement opportunities, and a mentor who will ensure her voice is heard from day one. The transformation of Hartley & Associates, now renamed Chen & Associates in honor of my grandfather, continues. We're not perfect. We still face challenges, resistance from old guard industry players who prefer the way things were. But we're proof that change is possible, that the structures that seem immovable can be transformed when someone finds the right leverage point. Richard sent me a letter last month, not through lawyers this time, but personally. It was short, bitter, but with an undertone of something that might have been regret. "You won," he wrote. "I hope you're satisfied." I wrote back, equally brief. "I didn't win, I reclaimed. There's a difference." I don't know if he understood what I meant. I don't know if he's capable of understanding that this was never a game to me, never about beating him. It was about survival, about justice, about creating space for people like me to exist without apology. The phoenix on the music box, the one my grandmother talked about in her confused moments, makes sense to me now. The phoenix doesn't rise from the ashes out of revenge. It rises because that's its nature, because destruction is not its end, but its transformation. The fire that was meant to destroy it becomes the catalyst for its rebirth. Every person who's been told they're nothing carries within them the potential for that transformation. Not everyone will find a music box with hidden shares. Not everyone will have such a clear-cut path to vindication. But everyone has the power to refuse the definitions others impose on them, to insist on their own worth, to rise from the ashes of others' prejudices. I think about the young woman I was 3 years ago, standing in Richard's office, being told I should be grateful for whatever scraps I was given. I wish I could go back and tell her, "This is not your ending. This is your beginning. Every humiliation is teaching you. Every dismissal is preparing you. You are not nothing. You never were. And someday, the very people who are trying to erase you will have to reckon with everything you've become." But I couldn't know that then. I had to live through it, had to descend into believing their lies about me before I could rise above them. That's the paradox of transformation. Sometimes you have to be broken down to your foundations before you can rebuild yourself stronger. The company continues to thrive. We've opened offices in Seoul, Beijing, Mumbai, markets Richard dismissed as too foreign for serious business. Our revenue has tripled. We've been featured in case studies at business schools analyzing how a complete cultural transformation can revitalize a stagnant company. But I measure our success differently. I measure it in the young employees who come to work excited rather than dreading. I measure it in the ideas that flow freely in meetings where everyone knows their voice matters. I measure it in the clients who choose us, not despite our diversity, but because of it. Last week, I hired a young man named Carlos, brilliant strategist, community college graduate, first in his family to work in corporate America. During his interview, he said something that stopped me cold. "I applied here because I heard about your story," he said. "Not the revenge part everyone focuses on, but the part about remembering who you are when the world tries to make you forget. My father, he's a janitor, cleans offices like this at night. My whole life, I've been told I should be grateful if I end up anywhere other than pushing a mop, but you've shown that we don't have to accept the roles they assign us." I hired him on the spot, not out of sympathy, but because that kind of awareness, that refusal to internalize limitations, that's exactly what drives innovation. Richard never understood that. He thought hunger was weakness. He never realized it was power waiting to be unleashed. The music box, I discovered later, still works. When you wind the key hidden beneath its base, it plays an old Chinese melody my grandmother used to hum. I wind it sometimes when I'm alone in my office, usually late at night when I'm working on strategies for our next expansion. The melody reminds me of my grandmother's small apartment in Chinatown, of my mother coming home exhausted from her 3 jobs, of dinners of rice and vegetables that we pretended were feasts. It reminds me that everything I have now is built on their sacrifices, their dreams deferred so mine could be realized. But it also reminds me of Richard's smirk, of Jessica's dismissive laugh, of David's casual cruelty. Not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. They showed me exactly what kind of leader I never wanted to be. They taught me, through their negative example, the importance of recognizing value wherever it appears, in whatever package it comes. The business world has a short memory. New scandals replace old ones. New heroes emerge. My story has already begun to fade from the headlines, replaced by other tales of corporate upheaval. That's fine with me. I was never interested in fame, only in change, but occasionally I still receive messages from people who remember, who were inspired, who found their own music boxes in whatever form they appeared. A woman in Texas discovered her grandmother had patents that were stolen by a major corporation. A man in Florida found evidence that his family's restaurant recipes had been appropriated by a national chain. They fought back, not always winning as dramatically as I did, but always reclaiming something: dignity, recognition, compensation, or simply the truth. There's a network of us now, the ones who were supposed to be nothing, the ones who were erased from narratives we helped write. We support each other, share resources, provide recommendations. We're building an alternate structure, one where worth isn't determined by pedigree or connections, but by talent and contribution. Richard's former office has been converted into a communal workspace where junior employees can collaborate on projects. His massive desk was donated to charity. The only thing I kept was the view, not for myself, but as a reminder of how perspectives can change. The same skyline that once represented everything I couldn't have now represents everything we're building. Sometimes, usually on quiet Sunday mornings when I'm alone in the office, I stand at those windows and think about my grandfather, Chen Wei Long, the man whose investment built this place, but whose name was erased from its history. I think about what he would say if he could see his granddaughter standing here, not as an interloper or a charity case, but as the owner. I think he would say what my grandmother said in her clearer moments: "Remember who you are. I am Emma Chen. I am the daughter of a woman who worked 3 jobs to give me a chance. I am the granddaughter of immigrants who believed in the American dream, even when America didn't believe in them. I am the heir to a legacy that was hidden but never destroyed. I am not nothing. I never was. And neither are you, if you're reading this. If you've ever been made to feel less than, if you've ever had your contributions minimized or your worth questioned, you are not nothing. You never were. The world is full of Richard Hartleys, people who will try to convince you that you should be grateful for whatever space they allow you to occupy. They'll use sophisticated language and corporate speak to mask their prejudices. They'll create systems designed to keep you in what they've decided is your place. But here's what 3 years of humiliation followed by the most dramatic reversal taught me. Their power is an illusion maintained by our participation in it. The moment we stop believing in their authority to define us, the moment we insist on our own worth, their entire structure begins to wobble. You might not have a hidden inheritance. You might not have stock certificates in a music box. But you have something they can never take away. The knowledge of your own value, the strength that comes from surviving their attempts to diminish you, the power that comes from refusing to be erased. Document everything. Build your networks. Support others who are fighting the same fight. And when your moment comes, because it will come, in whatever form it takes, be ready. Be ready to stand in that conference room, or that boardroom, or that courtroom, or wherever your vindication happens, and say, "That's a shame, because I just bought the company," or "I just got the promotion," or "I just proved you wrong," or simply, "I am not nothing." The phoenix rises not because the fire chooses to spare it, but because it chooses to transform within the flames. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment of humiliation, these are not your destruction. They are your transformation. I still take the bus to work sometimes, not because I have to anymore, but because I want to remember. I want to remember the woman who used to sit in the back, exhausted, wondering if things would ever change. I want to honor her journey, her persistence, her refusal to give up, even when giving up would have been so much easier. The other day, I sat next to a young woman who reminded me of myself from 3 years ago. Same exhausted expression, same carefully maintained, but obviously second-hand professional clothes. Same look of someone fighting to maintain dignity in a world designed to strip it away. She was crying quietly, trying to hide it. I offered her a tissue. "Bad day at work?" I asked gently. She nodded, unable to speak. "Let me guess," I said. "They tell you you're lucky to be there. They give you all the work but none of the credit. They make you feel like you're never quite good enough, no matter how hard you try." Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Because I've been you," I said, "and I want you to know something. It gets better. Not because they change, but because you do. You get stronger, you get smarter, you learn their games, and then you change the rules." "But how?" she asked desperately. "I can barely afford to eat. I can't quit. I have nothing." "You don't have nothing," I said firmly. "You have yourself. You have your intelligence that got you the job in the first place. You have the strength that gets you up every morning despite how they treat you. You have the dignity they're trying to take but can never truly steal unless you give it to them." I gave her my card. "Call me," I said. "We're always looking for talented people who understand what it means to fight for their place in the world." She looked at the card, saw the company name, and gasped. Everyone in Chicago's business world knew the story by now. You're Emma Chen?" "I am," I said. "But 3 years ago, I was you, crying on the bus, wondering if I was worth anything at all. The answer is yes. You are worth everything. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She called the next week. She starts with us next month, not as a charity case, not as a diversity hire, but as a valuable addition to our team who happens to understand what it's like to be underestimated. That understanding, that hunger, that determination forged in the fires of dismissal. These are assets Richard never understood. The music box sits in its case, a monument to hidden truths and patient justice. Sometimes employees bring their children to the office, and the kids always gravitate toward it, fascinated by its beauty and age. I tell them the story in simple terms, about a great-grandfather who was treated unfairly, about secrets hidden for safety, about truth eventually coming to light. "Why did he hide it?" one little girl asked recently. "Why didn't he fight back right away?" "Because sometimes," I told her, "the world isn't ready for your truth. Sometimes you have to wait for the right moment, prepare for the right opportunity. But the truth doesn't disappear just because it's hidden. It waits. And when the time is right, it emerges stronger than ever." She nodded solemnly, as if storing this information for future use. Her mother, one of our project managers, smiled at me gratefully. She had her own story of workplace discrimination before joining us, her own journey from being dismissed to being valued. That's what we're building here. Not just a successful company, but a refuge for talent that others overlook. A place where worth isn't determined by background or connections, but by contribution and character. It's what my grandfather would have built if he'd been given the chance. It's what my grandmother protected the possibility of through all those years of hiding the truth. It's what my mother worked 3 jobs to give me the opportunity to create. The company is my vindication, but it's not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who was ever told they were nothing and refused to believe it. It belongs to everyone who documented the discrimination, who saved the emails, who remembered the slights not for revenge, but for evidence. It belongs to everyone who's still on that journey, still in their 3 years of humiliation, still waiting for their music box moment. Richard Hartley thought he was firing the office nobody, the charity case he'd been forced to tolerate. He had no idea he was lighting the fuse of his own destruction. But that's the thing about treating people like they're nothing. You never see them coming when they finally realize they're everything. I don't hate Richard anymore. I don't even think about him much, except as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating people based on prejudice rather than potential. His legacy is one of exclusion and cruelty. Mine will be one of inclusion and opportunity. But there's one more part of this story I haven't told, one more twist that even I didn't see coming until recently. Last month, while going through old company records for our 70th anniversary celebration, we're reclaiming the full history now, including my grandfather's role, I found something extraordinary. In the company's original incorporation documents, there was a clause Richard's grandfather had insisted on. If ever a Chen descendant reclaimed their shares and took control of the company, a trust would be activated. William Hartley, despite his prejudices, had apparently felt enough guilt to set aside a fund for the education and advancement of immigrant families in Chicago. The trust, hidden in legal language so complex it took 3 lawyers to decode it, had been accumulating interest for 70 years. It was now worth $12 million. Richard had never known about it. If he had, he might have treated me differently, might have recognized the danger I posed not just to his control, but to his entire worldview. Or maybe not. Prejudice has a way of blinding people to reality. The trust is now active, providing scholarships and business grants to first-generation Americans, to children of immigrants, to all the people Richard would have dismissed as not having the right background. Every year, it will create dozens of new Emma Chens, Carlos Rodriguez's, Amy Parks, brilliant minds who just need a chance to prove themselves. It's the perfect ending to my grandfather's story. Even in being cheated, he somehow won. Even in being erased, he left a mark that couldn't be removed. The very document that excluded him contained the seeds of inclusion for thousands of others. I announced the trust at our anniversary gala in front of Chicago's business elite, many of whom had worked with Richard, had participated in the same culture of exclusion he perpetuated. I watched their faces as I explained how their former colleague's grandfather had inadvertently funded the very diversity he'd tried to prevent. "This trust," I said, standing at the podium where Richard had once held court, "is proof that justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied. It's proof that the truth, once hidden, emerges with compound interest. and it's proof that the people you dismiss today may be the ones writing your history tomorrow." The applause was uncertain at first, then grew stronger as people decided which side of history they wanted to be on. Several came up afterward to pledge additional funds to the trust, whether from genuine conviction or calculated self-interest. I didn't care. The money would change lives regardless of the donor's motivations. The first recipient of the trust was a young Vietnamese woman studying engineering at community college while working nights cleaning the very office buildings where she hoped to one day work. The second was a Mexican-American man whose parents sold fruit on street corners to pay for his coding boot camp. The third was a refugee from Syria who was rebuilding his life and career in a new country. Each of them reminded me of myself, of my grandfather, of everyone who's ever been told their dreams were too big for someone of their background. Each of them carried within them the potential to transform not just their own lives, but entire industries if given the chance. At the gala, someone asked me if I felt my journey was complete now that I'd not only reclaimed my family's legacy, but also activated this trust. Complete, I repeated, thinking about the question. No, this isn't a completion, it's a beginning. Every person who receives these funds, who gets the education, or starts the business they dreamed of, they're not ending my story. They're starting their own. And someday, they'll create opportunities for others, who will create opportunities for still others. That's how real change happens, not in one dramatic reversal, but in thousands of small revolutions. The woman who asked, a CEO of another major firm, nodded thoughtfully. "You've changed the game," she said. "No," I corrected. "I've revealed that the game was always rigged. Now we're creating a new one, with different rules, where everyone gets to play." She smiled, a bit uncomfortably. She was part of the old guard, had probably participated in her share of cultural fit discrimination. But she was here, at our gala, trying to understand the new landscape. That was something. The music box continues to play its melody when wound, a song from a homeland my grandfather left in search of opportunity, a song my grandmother hummed while hiding the truth, a song my mother probably heard while working her night shifts, dreaming of something better for her daughter. Now it's a song of victory, but not the vengeful kind. It's the victory of persistence over prejudice, of truth over lies, of inclusion over exclusion. It's the victory of every person who's ever been told they're nothing and refused to believe it. 3 years ago, Richard Hartley looked at me and saw nothing of value, nothing worth respecting, nothing worth promoting. He saw a charity case, a diversity checkbox, a convenient target for his casual cruelty. He fired me with a smirk, confident in his power, secure in his position. "You're fired," he said, expecting me to crumble, to confirm his view of my worthlessness. "That's a shame," I replied, "because I just bought the company." In that moment, his world ended and mine began. But more than that, a door opened for everyone who'd been locked out. A path appeared for everyone who'd been told there was no place for them. A voice emerged for everyone who'd been silenced. The company thrives, the trust grows, the network expands. And somewhere in Chicago, in New York, in Los Angeles, in small towns and big cities across the country, someone is being told they're nothing. Someone is being dismissed, discriminated against, diminished. To them, I say, document everything. Build your strength, find your allies, and wait for your moment. Because the people who call you nothing are revealing their own limitations, not yours. The people who try to erase you are only making your eventual emergence more powerful. The people who underestimate you are handing you the greatest advantage in business and in life, the element of surprise. Your music box is out there, in whatever form it takes. Your vindication is waiting, in whatever shape it appears. Your moment will come, whenever you're ready to seize it. And when it does, when you stand in your own conference room facing your own Richard Hartley, when you get to deliver your own version of "I just bought the company," remember this: you were never nothing. You never were. The phoenix doesn't rise because it's special. It rises because that's what phoenixes do. They transform in the fire that was meant to destroy them. They emerge not despite the ashes, but because of them. You are the phoenix. The fire is not your ending. It's your beginning.